The first reports did not describe a machine in ordinary military terms. They described a moving district of masonry and metal seen through smoke, picked feed distortion, and heat bloom, advancing with the pace of a deliberate siege. Forward observers noted towers where a normal engine should have shown only a carapace, window lights above armour belts, gun flashes from elevations too high to be mistaken for conventional batteries, and footfalls strong enough to register as structural shock in nearby ruins. Surviving witnesses rarely agreed on exact dimensions, but they agreed on scale. It was larger than the battle line around it and seemed to carry a city on its back. Later inspection records would classify such sightings with more precision, but the earliest accounts already captured the essential truth. What had entered the battlefield was not simply a Titan in the common sense of the word. It was the Imperator Class Titan. Its lineage begins far earlier than the mature Imperium. The broader Titan tradition is generally tied to Mars and to the long technological decline and violence of the Age of Strife, when vast war engines were devised to fight threats beyond the tolerance of ordinary armoured formations. Within that wider family of god engines, the Emperor grade emerged as the upper extreme of Imperial terrestrial war machine design. The Imperator pattern was not a casual enlargement of smaller classes. It represented a different level of strategic intent. Smaller Titans could dominate sectors, break armoured thrusts, and dual opposing engines. An Imperator was conceived to anchor offensives, overall hostile concentrations, serve as a battlefield command centre, and carry enough firepower and internal capacity to alter the shape of an entire operation merely by arriving. It belonged to the Collegia Titanica and the Titan legions of the Mechanicum, later the Adeptus Mechanicus, but in practice its use always involved coordination with wider Imperial armies, because a machine of that scale could never be a local asset in any meaningful sense. The developmental logic behind the Imperator pattern followed the same harsh rule that governed much of Imperial military engineering. If a battlefield problem could not be solved by speed, it would be solved by endurance, mass, elevation, power generation, and weight of fire. The Emperor grade answered the recurring need for a mobile fortress that could survive concentrated bombardment while projecting destructive force across multiple ranges. Over time, this logic produced at least several Emperor variants, including the more generalized Imperator and the more specialized Warmonger. The distinction matters because it clarifies the Imperator's intended role from the beginning. It was not designed solely as a distant artillery platform. It was designed as a colossal assault engine able to intensify its lethality as it closed, while still acting as a command node and protected transport for troops assigned to defend it or exploit breaches created by its advance. In other words, its development fused siege doctrine, command doctrine, and Titan warfare into a single chassis. That developmental path also explains why the Imperator acquired a reputation unlike that of smaller Titans. A Warhound or Reaver could be discussed in terms of maneuver and tactical pairing. A Warlord could be discussed in terms of dominance over a battlefront. The Imperator forced military planners to think in larger blocks of time and space. Routes had to be surveyed, ground pressure considered, urban approaches evaluated, and supporting formations reassigned around its presence. The machine did not merely join an order of battle, the order of battle adjusted to it. This is one reason Emperor Titans remained rare even among Titan legions. Available records suggest that, in campaign conditions, many legions could field only a few Imperators at most. They were not common line assets. They were exceptional concentrations of doctrine, material, manpower, and ritual authority, reserved for circumstances where less immense engines would not suffice, or where symbolic dominance was judged as important as physical destruction. Construction of an Imperator began with limits that were as theological as they were industrial. Any Titan required a union of sacred machinecraft, reactor engineering, void shield integration, motive fiber systems, and neural command architecture. At Emperor scale, each of those disciplines expanded into a project of extreme complexity. The skeletal frame had to bear not only the stress of locomotion and recoil from immense primary weapons, but the burden of the vast superstructure mounted above the chassis. The lower body remained recognizably Titan in form. enormous legs built around synthetic musculature and articulated joints, a central body containing power and command systems, and arm mounts intended for weapons too great for lesser classes. Above that, however, the Imperator diverged visibly from most other Titans. Its upper structure was fortified and monumental, not merely armoured. Spires, bastions, galleries, shrine spaces, and defensive positions turned the machine into a walking fortress in the literal sense. This famous upper architecture was not decorative in any simple way, even when it appeared excessive by ordinary engineering standards. It served cultural, military, and psychological functions at once. Mechanicus belief treated Emperor Titans as especially potent embodiments of the machine god's power, and the temple-like structures built atop the chassis expressed that status physically. Yet the same arrangement also provided interior volume for crew operations, troop transport, observation, internal defense, and command activity. The result was a machine whose exterior communicated sanctity and terror, while its interior behaved more like a fortified installation than a vehicle. To hostile observers, that cathedral silhouette could look ornamental. To Imperial planners, it offered elevated command space, protected circulation, compartments for supporting personnel, and a structure large enough to carry an infantry company, with additional defenders or attendants when required. A fortress was being moved on Titan legs because the battlefield needed a fortress that would not stay still. The problem of scale has always complicated discussion of the Imperator's construction, because exact heights vary across sources and eras. What remains consistent is not a single trusted measurement, but the consensus that the machine stands beyond the already extreme upper tier of conventional Titans. One commonly repeated scale estimate places an Imperator at approximately 55.5 meters, while the infamous Daisirai is described at about 43 meters in one Horus Heresy context, likely reflecting differences in depiction, structural details, or the absence of later cathedral styling. Even official commentary acknowledges that exact height remains disputed. For practical purposes, the dispute changes little. Whether one accepts the lower or higher estimates, the construction challenge remains immense. A walking engine in that band of size demands extraordinary structural reinforcement, colossal power generation, layered void shielding, and a manufacturing tradition that the Imperium later struggled to preserve in full. Because of this, Imperator construction was never just a matter of fabrication. It was accumulation. Vast armor sections, reactor components, neural interfaces, weapon housings, shield emitters, motive systems, reliquary elements, command sanctums, and defensive emplacements all had to be assembled into a coherent whole whose failures would be catastrophic at any point in the build. Even transportation and deployment were specialized problems in Titan warfare generally, with Imperial Titans requiring dedicated mechanicum transport systems and descent methods. At Emperor scale, those logistical burdens only multiplied. This helps explain why the Imperium came to regard Emperor Titans as relic-capable assets, not because every example was uniformly ancient, but because the knowledge, industry, and ritual precision needed to produce or fully replicate such engines became ever more difficult to sustain. The machine was a monument to what the Mechanicum could achieve, and later, to what the Imperium feared it might no longer achieve reliably at all. Development across the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy further sharpened the Imperator's role. It was during those era-spanning conflicts that Emperor Titans became linked with the most consequential ground campaigns in Imperial memory. The notorious Dies Irae demonstrates this clearly. Even as an example corrupted later by treachery and chaos, it shows what the Imperator pattern meant in operational terms. Such an engine could survive conditions that annihilated ordinary forces, participate in the largest assaults of the age, and become memorable not just as a weapon, but as a decisive presence on the field. Its later infamy at the Siege of Terra and in subsequent campaigns confirms the same point from the negative side. An Imperator in enemy hands was not simply another hostile Titan, it was a battlefield crisis that could justify extreme sacrifice to destroy. The pattern's historical development cannot be separated from those legendary appearances, because they taught the Imperium exactly what this class could do when properly deployed, or when allowed to advance unchecked. By maturity, the Imperator had become less a prototype of excess, and more a stable doctrine embodied in steel, reactor flame, and sacred systems architecture. It was understood as a general-purpose Emperor Titan, but that phrase can mislead. At this level, general purpose did not mean ordinary. It meant able to devastate fortified zones, support line-breaking operations, act as reserve mass behind the front, transport troops for local defense or critical seizure, and function as a mobile headquarters for senior command within a Titan legion. Grandmasters could use modified Imperators for direct command because few platforms offered comparable protection, communications dominance, and battlefield visibility. The machine's development had therefore converged on a rare synthesis. It was at once a siege tower, a command citadel, a troop bastion, and a heavy assault engine designed to intensify destruction as range collapsed. Most weapons in war are built to do one thing very well. The Imperator was built to do several things at a scale that bent the rest of the campaign around it. None of this made the class invulnerable, and that fact also shaped its development. Emperor Titans did not rely on close combat in the way some lesser patterns might under desperate conditions. Their design emphasis was overwhelming range devastation, shielded endurance, and the ability to break opposition before enemy Titans could approach too closely. This reveals a central truth about the Imperator's construction philosophy. It was not meant to be nimble, and its builders did not try to pretend otherwise. They accepted reduced agility as the cost of creating an engine whose presence could dominate an operational zone through armor, internal volume, elevated weapons, and layered void shields. To destroy one demanded concentrated effort, specialist knowledge, or catastrophic self-sacrifice. To lose one was equally disastrous, because records describe the destruction of an Imperator as a blast of such magnitude that whole regiments could be wiped out and units at great distance smashed apart or hurled across the landscape by the force of the detonation. Even in death, the machine remained strategically significant. Seen in strict chronological terms, the Imperator Class Titan begins as part of the early Martian tradition of Titan warfare, develops through the Imperium's need for ever greater mobile dominance, reaches mature expression as the generalized assault form of the Emperor grade, and proves its value and terror across the largest wars of human history. Its construction reflects that journey in every visible feature. The humanoid war engine foundation ties it to the ancient Titan lineage. The enormous reactors, shield arrays, and motive systems place it at the edge of what Imperial industry can sustain. The cathedral fortress mounted above the chassis reveals the fusion of warfare, religion, command, and intimidation that defines mature Imperial statecraft. By the time an Imperator steps onto a battlefield, development is already complete in the only sense that matters. It has become the final answer to a question asked over millennia of war. How much firepower, resilience, command utility, and symbolic force can be placed into a single walking machine before it ceases to resemble a vehicle and becomes a moving stronghold? That answer is the Imperator Class Titan. The Imperator Class Titan presents itself as a structure before it presents itself as a machine. At distance, observers often record it as a layered silhouette composed of vertical mass rather than horizontal spread, with fortified elevations rising above the primary chassis. This arrangement is not incidental. The machine is built upward as much as it is built outward, creating a tiered profile where the lower hull carries the burden of locomotion and power, while the upper works extend into battlements, towers, and hardened galleries. The result is a vertical dominance that allows its weapons, sensors, and command elements to operate from elevated positions, reducing obstruction and widening lines of engagement across complex terrain. The exterior is defined by immense armor plating arranged in overlapping sections, each segment designed to distribute kinetic force and thermal stress across a wider surface before it can reach critical systems beneath. These plates are not uniform. They vary in thickness and contour depending on location, with heavier reinforcement around the central reactor housing, command sanctum, and leg joints where structural failure would be catastrophic. The plating itself carries the marks of both function and doctrine. It is inscribed, reinforced, layered, and often augmented with additional structures that appear ceremonial but serve defensive or observational purposes. The cathedral-like superstructure is the most recognizable trait, but beneath that visual identity lies a disciplined arrangement of armor belts, access ports, maintenance corridors, and internal reinforcement ribs that maintain structural integrity under constant strain. The legs of the Imperator are among its most critical engineering features. Each limb is constructed around massive articulated joints supported by synthetic muscle fibers and reinforced pistons capable of bearing the full weight of the superstructure above. The feet are broad, designed to distribute pressure across unstable ground, while maintaining balance during firing sequences that would destabilize lesser engines. Every step is calculated, not only to maintain forward motion, but to preserve the integrity of the terrain beneath it. In urban zones, this means the machine must often choose its path with care, as its passage can collapse underlying infrastructure. In open terrain, the weight is less constrained, but the impact of each stride still generates measurable shock through the surrounding area. Internally, the Imperator is divided into layered compartments that reflect its multiple roles. The lower sections house the primary reactor systems, motive controls, and critical engineering spaces. These areas are heavily shielded and isolated to prevent cascading failures. Above them lies the command core, where the princeps and moderati interface with the machine systems. This space is protected not only by armor but by depth, requiring any penetrative force to pass through multiple defensive layers before reaching it. Higher still, within the upper works, are observation platforms, defensive emplacements, and transport compartments for personnel assigned to operate within or defend the Titan during extended engagements. The internal design prioritizes redundancy and compartmentalization, ensuring that damage to one section does not immediately compromise the entire machine. The Imperator's specifications are often debated due to variations in recorded data, but certain characteristics remain consistent across accounts. It is among the tallest and most massive Titans fielded by the Imperium, with a structure that supports multiple primary weapon systems alongside numerous secondary batteries. Its reactor output is sufficient to sustain continuous operation of these systems while maintaining void shields and internal functions. This level of power generation places extreme demands on its cooling and regulation systems, which must dissipate heat generated not only by the reactor, but by repeated weapons discharge and sustained shield operation. Speed is not a defining trait of the Imperator. Its movement is deliberate, with forward progress measured in controlled steps rather than rapid maneuver. However, this limitation is offset by its reach. The elevation of its weapon systems allows it to engage targets across extended distances, reducing the need for repositioning. When movement is required, it is typically in support of a broader advance, where its presence anchors the formation rather than adapts to it. This reflects a fundamental principle of its design. The Imperator does not respond to the battlefield. The battlefield reorganizes around it. Offensive capability is where the Imperator's scale translates directly into dominance. Its arm-mounted weapons represent some of the most destructive systems available to the Imperium, including plasma-based and energy projection systems capable of delivering sustained high-output fire. These primary weapons are supported by additional systems mounted along the carapace and within the superstructure. Defensive batteries are positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against aerial and ground threats, ensuring that the Titan can defend itself even when primary weapons are engaged elsewhere. The distribution of these weapons is not random. Each system is placed to maximize coverage while minimizing interference with other systems. Arm-mounted weapons handle primary engagements, targeting enemy Titans, fortified positions, or large concentrations of armored units. Carapace-mounted systems extend this reach, engaging targets beyond the immediate front or providing suppressive fire across a wider area. Within the upper structure, smaller but numerous defensive emplacements maintain constant coverage against incoming threats, particularly fast-moving aircraft or infantry attempting to approach the Titan's base. The Imperator's offensive strength is amplified by its ability to sustain fire over extended periods, Its reactor output allows for repeated discharge of high-energy weapons without immediate depletion, enabling it to maintain pressure on enemy forces. This sustained output is critical in siege conditions, where continuous bombardment is required to break fortified defences. It also allows the Titan to engage multiple targets sequentially without significant downtime, maintaining dominance across the battlefield. Defensively, the Imperator relies on a combination of physical armour and void shielding. The void shield system forms the first layer of protection, projecting an energy barrier that absorbs or deflects incoming attacks before they can reach the armour. These shields operate in layers, allowing the Titan to withstand multiple impacts before the system is overwhelmed. When shields are breached, the underlying armour provides a second line of defence, designed to absorb and dissipate the remaining force. The integration of these systems creates a defense-in-depth approach. Incoming fire must first penetrate the void shields, then overcome the armour plating, and finally reach critical systems within the Titan's interior. Each layer is designed to reduce the effectiveness of the attack, ensuring that even successful hits do not immediately compromise the machine's functionality. This layered defense is one of the reasons Imperators are so difficult to destroy. It requires sustained, concentrated fire or highly specialized weaponry to overcome all layers effectively. Additional defensive measures are embedded within the Titan's structure. Internal compartments are sealed and reinforced to prevent rapid depressurization or fire spread. Redundant systems ensure that damage to one component does not disable the entire machine. Automated suppression systems respond to internal threats, while crew members are trained to isolate and contain damage during combat. The Titan's size allows for these redundancies to be implemented at a scale not possible in smaller engines. One of the more distinctive defensive traits of the Imperator is its ability to carry and deploy supporting personnel. Infantry units stationed within the Titan can be used to defend its exterior, repel boarding attempts, or secure areas cleared by its advance. This capability transforms the Titan into more than a standalone weapon. It becomes a mobile stronghold capable of projecting both mechanical and human force simultaneously. In prolonged engagements, this combination allows it to maintain control over contested areas even as it continues to advance. The psychological impact of the Imperator's presence is also a functional aspect of its design. Its size, structure, and firepower create an immediate impression that affects both Allied and enemy forces. For Allied units, it serves as a focal point, a visible centre of strength that reinforces morale and cohesion. For opposing forces, it represents a threat that is difficult to counter and impossible to ignore. This dual effect enhances its strategic value beyond its physical capabilities. Despite its strengths, the Imperator is not without limitations. Its size makes it a prominent target, and its movement constraints can be exploited in environments where terrain restricts its advance. However, these limitations are anticipated within its design. The Titan is rarely deployed without support, and its operational role assumes the presence of accompanying forces to mitigate these vulnerabilities. Its strength lies not in independence but in integration, functioning as the central element of a coordinated assault. In summary, the Imperator Class Titan is defined by a convergence of scale, structure, and sustained power. Its distinctive traits are not merely aesthetic but serve functional roles that enhance its effectiveness across multiple dimensions of warfare. Its specifications reflect the extreme requirements of its role, balancing immense power output with structural resilience. Its offensive capabilities allow it to dominate engagements through sustained, high-output fire, while its defensive systems ensure survivability under intense conditions. Each of these elements is part of a unified design philosophy that treats the Titan not as a single-purpose weapon, but as a comprehensive war platform capable of shaping the battlefield through its presence, its firepower, and its endurance. The operation of an Imperator-class Titan is not the work of a single individual, despite the central importance of the princeps. It is a coordinated function of a structured crew whose roles are divided across command, weapons control, engineering, and internal security. At the core of this hierarchy sits the princeps, permanently installed within an amniotic interface cradle, physically integrated with the Titan's command systems. This connection allows direct neural interaction with the machine's manifold, translating intent into movement, targeting, and system control. The princeps does not merely operate the Titan. The princeps becomes the primary conduit through which the Titan expresses action. Supporting the princeps are the moderati, positioned at secondary control stations. These officers handle specific operational domains such as weapons targeting, sensor interpretation, and systems management. Their function is to reduce the cognitive burden on the princeps, ensuring that the Titan can respond to multiple threats simultaneously without overwhelming its central operator. Communication between princeps and moderati is constant and precise, with each decision transmitted and executed in near real time. The effectiveness of an Imperator depends heavily on the cohesion of this command group. A well-synchronized crew can maintain sustained combat efficiency even under extreme conditions, while breakdowns in coordination can reduce the Titan's responsiveness at critical moments. Beneath the command tier lies the engineering cohort. These personnel are responsible for maintaining the Titan's internal systems during operation, including reactor stability, power distribution, cooling regulation, and damage control. Given the scale of the Imperator, engineering teams are extensive and distributed throughout the lower compartments. Their work is continuous, as the demands placed on the machine during combat generate constant strain on its systems. Reactor output must be carefully managed to prevent overload, while heat generated by weapons, discharge and shield operation must be dissipated efficiently to avoid internal damage. Engineering crews operate under strict protocols, responding to fluctuations and failures with immediate corrective action. Internal security and support personnel form another essential component of the crew. These include troops assigned to defend the Titan from boarding attempts, maintain internal order, and assist in emergency situations. Their presence reflects the Imperator's role as a mobile fortress. Unlike smaller Titans, which rely primarily on external defenses, the Imperator must also secure its interior spaces against infiltration. These troops are equipped to operate within the confined and complex environment of the Titan's superstructure, moving through corridors, access points, and defensive positions as required. In extended engagements, they may also be deployed externally to secure objectives in the Titan's immediate vicinity. The total crew complement of an Imperator can reach into the hundreds, depending on configuration and operational requirements. This includes not only command and engineering personnel, but also attendants, technicians, and support staff responsible for sustaining long-term operation. The Titan is capable of remaining active for extended periods, and its crew must be able to function continuously within its confines. This requires a level of logistical support and internal organization comparable to that of a small military installation. Food, rest cycles, medical care, and equipment maintenance are all managed within the Titan's structure, allowing it to operate independently for significant durations. The use case of the Imperator Class Titan reflects its status as a strategic asset rather than a tactical tool. It is deployed in situations where overwhelming force is required to achieve decisive outcomes. This includes large-scale assaults on fortified positions, defensive operations where a stable anchor is needed to hold a critical line, and engagements against enemy Titans or equivalent threats. Its presence is often reserved for pivotal moments within a campaign, where its capabilities can shift the balance of power. In offensive operations, the Imperator functions as a spearhead and a stabilizing force simultaneously. Its forward advance is deliberate, supported by accompanying units that protect its flanks and exploit the breaches it creates. As it moves, its weapon systems engage high-value targets, dismantling defensive structures and neutralizing opposing heavy assets. The elevation of its weapons allows it to fire over intervening obstacles, maintaining pressure on enemy positions even in complex terrain. This makes it particularly effective in urban warfare and siege conditions, where line of sight is often restricted. In defensive roles, the Imperator serves as a central bastion. Its durability and firepower allow it to hold ground against sustained assaults, providing a focal point around which other units can organize. Its ability to absorb damage while continuing to operate makes it a reliable anchor in situations where retreat is not an option. The Titan's presence can deter enemy advances, forcing opponents to commit significant resources to neutralize it before attempting further progress. This defensive utility is enhanced by its capacity to support infantry operations, deploying troops to secure surrounding areas and reinforce defensive positions. The Imperator's role extends beyond direct combat. It also functions as a command platform, particularly when configured for senior leadership. The elevated command spaces within its superstructure provide a vantage point from which battlefield conditions can be observed and coordinated. Communication systems integrated into the Titan allow for the transmission of orders and intelligence across wide areas, enabling it to act as a mobile headquarters. This capability is especially valuable in large-scale engagements where fixed command centers may be vulnerable or impractical. Logistically, the deployment of an Imperator requires extensive preparation. Routes must be planned to accommodate its size and weight, with consideration given to terrain stability and infrastructure limitations. Supporting units must be assigned to provide protection, resupply, and reconnaissance. The Titan itself must be maintained at peak operational readiness, with all systems checked and calibrated before deployment. These requirements limit the frequency of its use, reinforcing its role as a rare and significant asset within the Imperial arsenal. The conclusion drawn from its design and application is consistent across recorded engagements. The Imperator Class Titan is not intended to replace other elements of warfare, but to amplify them. Its presence enhances the effectiveness of surrounding forces, providing both physical support and psychological reinforcement. It is a force multiplier in the most literal sense, capable of transforming the scale and intensity of an engagement through its participation. At the same time, its limitations ensure that it cannot operate in isolation. Its reliance on support units, logistical planning, and coordinated command structures means that it is most effective when integrated into a broader strategy. This interdependence reflects a broader principle within Imperial warfare. No single asset, regardless of its power, is sufficient on its own. The Imperator exemplifies this principle by demonstrating how extreme capability must be balanced with structured support to achieve optimal results. Ultimately, the Imperator Class Titan represents the culmination of a specific approach to warfare. It embodies the belief that dominance can be achieved through scale, resilience, and sustained force. Its crew structure reflects the complexity required to operate such a machine, while its use cases demonstrate the strategic thinking behind its deployment. It is not merely a weapon, but a comprehensive war platform designed to influence every aspect of the battlefield in which it operates. This synthesis of command, firepower, and endurance defines the Imperator's place within the Imperium's military hierarchy. It stands at the intersection of engineering, doctrine, and symbolism, serving as both a practical tool of war and a representation of Imperial strength. When deployed, it does not simply participate in a battle. It redefines the parameters of that battle, imposing its presence on all who encounter it and leaving a lasting impact on the outcome of the conflict. Recorded impressions from the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus consistently frame the Imperator Class Titan not as a conventional battlefield asset, but as a moving point of strategic gravity. Administrative logs rarely begin with descriptions of weapon output or armor resilience. Instead, they begin with adjustments. Entire campaign structures are revised once an Imperator is confirmed present within a theatre. Supply routes are rerouted, command hierarchies are elevated around its operational radius, and deployment timings are recalibrated to align with its advance. The machine is treated less as a unit and more as a condition that reshapes the environment in which all other units must operate. Mechanicus observational records approach the same subject from a different angle, but reach a similar conclusion. The Imperator is frequently described as a stable platform of extreme output, meaning its performance does not fluctuate significantly once operating parameters are established. Unlike smaller engines that may rely on maneuver or adaptive positioning, the Imperator's effectiveness increases as the battlefield stabilizes around it. Its reactor output, shield cycling, and weapons discharge patterns are most efficient when it is allowed to maintain a controlled pace of engagement. This has led to a recurring observation within Mechanicus documentation that the Imperator performs best when it dictates the tempo of conflict rather than responding to it. Administratum impressions emphasize predictability at scale. Once deployed, the Imperator introduces a measurable consistency into otherwise volatile engagements. Enemy movements tend to shift in response to its presence, often withdrawing from direct confrontation or concentrating force in attempts to neutralize it. Both reactions are considered advantageous. Withdrawal cedes territory, while concentration exposes enemy forces to high-output engagement. Administrative analyses frequently note that even unsuccessful attempts to destroy an Imperator result in significant attrition for opposing forces, effectively converting enemy initiative into measurable loss. Mechanicus observations expand on this by examining energy distribution and system endurance during prolonged engagements. Reports indicate that Imperators are capable of sustaining high levels of output across extended operational periods without significant degradation, provided that internal regulation remains stable. This endurance is not infinite, but it exceeds that of most battlefield assets by a considerable margin. The implication is clear within these records. An Imperator is not intended for rapid, decisive strikes. It is intended to apply continuous pressure until opposing resistance collapses under cumulative strain. Strategic use findings from both institutions converge on the concept of controlled escalation. The Imperator is rarely deployed at the opening phase of a campaign. Instead, it is introduced once sufficient reconnaissance and preliminary engagement have established the structure of the battlefield. This timing allows commanders to position the Titan where its impact will be maximized. Administratum logs describe this as anchored insertion, a process in which the Imperator enters a zone that has already been partially secured, then expands that security outward through sustained engagement. Mechanicus records support this approach by noting that premature deployment often leads to inefficient use of resources. Without a defined operational structure, the Imperator's capabilities can be underutilized, as its weapons may be forced to engage dispersed or low-value targets. When deployed into a stabilized environment, however, its firepower can be concentrated on critical nodes, accelerating the breakdown of enemy defenses. This reinforces the principle that the Imperator is most effective when used as a decisive instrument rather than a probing force. Observations also highlight the Titan's influence on Allied coordination. Units operating in proximity to an Imperator demonstrate increased cohesion and reduced deviation from assigned objectives. Administratum analysts attribute this to the clarity of command structure imposed by the Titan's presence. Its role as a mobile command platform allows for real-time adjustment of operations, reducing delays in communication and decision-making. Mechanicus documentation adds that the Titan's sensor arrays and elevated observation points contribute to this effect by providing comprehensive battlefield awareness, which can be distributed to supporting units. Another recurring observation concerns the Imperator's interaction with terrain. Administratum records note that its movement imposes constraints not only on enemy forces, but also on Allied planning. Routes must be selected with precision, avoiding areas where ground instability could hinder progress. Urban environments present both opportunities and challenges. The Titan's elevation allows it to engage targets across dense structures, but its size requires careful navigation to prevent structural collapse that could impede its own advance. Mechanicus logs further detail how terrain composition affects system efficiency, particularly in relation to heat dissipation and footing stability. Strategic findings also address the Imperator's role in psychological operations, though this is rarely framed in abstract terms. Instead, Administratum reports quantify behavioral changes in enemy forces following its deployment. Increased rates of withdrawal, higher instances of fragmented command, and elevated resource expenditure in attempts to counter the Titan are consistently recorded. These effects are treated as measurable outcomes rather than incidental observations. The Imperator's presence is therefore understood to generate both physical and behavioral impact, amplifying its strategic value beyond direct combat. Mechanicus documentation approaches this from a structural perspective, noting that the Titan's design inherently communicates dominance. Its scale, elevation, and sustained output create a continuous demonstration of capability that does not require additional signalling. This aligns with the broader Mechanicus view that form and function are inseparable. The Imperator's appearance is not merely symbolic, it is an extension of its operational role, reinforcing its position as a central force within the battlefield. Further observations focus on the integration of the Imperator within larger operational frameworks. Administratum records consistently emphasize that the Titan is most effective when supported by layered forces, including infantry, armored units, and aerial assets. These supporting elements serve to protect the Titan from specialized threats, secure areas within its operational radius, and exploit the conditions created by its advance. The Imperator in turn provides the stability and firepower needed to sustain these operations over time. This mutual dependence is a key component of its strategic use. Mechanicus findings complement this by examining system interactions during coordinated engagements. Data indicates that the Imperator's performance remains stable, even when operating in conjunction with multiple supporting units, suggesting that its systems are designed to function within complex operational environments. This capability allows it to serve as a central node within a network of forces, maintaining its effectiveness without requiring isolation from surrounding activity. Observations also address the limitations inherent in the Imperator's design, though these are framed as considerations rather than weaknesses. Administratum records note that its deployment requires significant resource allocation, both in terms of logistics and support. This necessitates careful planning to ensure that its use yields proportional strategic benefit. Mechanicus documentation adds that while the Titan systems are robust, they are not immune to failure, particularly under sustained extreme conditions. This reinforces the importance of maintaining operational discipline and avoiding unnecessary exposure to risk. In terms of strategic application, both institutions consistently identify the Imperator as a force multiplier of exceptional magnitude. Its presence enhances the effectiveness of allied units, disrupts enemy operations, and imposes a structure on the battlefield that favors controlled, sustained engagement. It is not designed for flexibility in the conventional sense. Instead, it provides a fixed point around which flexibility can be exercised by other elements of the force. The cumulative findings from Administratum and Mechanicus records present a unified perspective. The Imperator Class Titan is a stabilizing force within chaotic environments, capable of imposing order through sustained application of power. Its effectiveness is derived not only from its individual capabilities, but from its integration within a broader strategic framework. When deployed with precision and supported appropriately, it transforms the nature of engagement, shifting the balance of power in a manner that is both measurable and enduring. These impressions and observations do not elevate the Imperator beyond the constraints of warfare, but they do clarify its position within it. It is not an instrument of rapid change, but of controlled transformation. Its role is to reshape the battlefield over time, applying pressure until resistance is reduced to a state where final outcomes can be determined with minimal uncertainty. In this sense, the Imperator functions as both a weapon and a method, embodying a strategic approach that prioritizes stability, endurance, and overwhelming force applied with deliberate precision. Within Adeptus Administratum ledgers, the Imperator Class Titan is not recorded as a discrete expenditure, but as a sustained allocation that extends across multiple production cycles, forge outputs, and transport chains. Its construction does not follow a single financial event. It is distributed across years, sometimes decades, of material accumulation, labor dedication, and ritual authorization. Administratum tallies often avoid direct numerical totals, instead categorizing the project under long-term strategic investment classes reserved for assets whose value cannot be reduced to standard currency equivalents. In these records, the Imperator is treated as a convergence of industry rather than a product of it. Material requirements alone exceed those of most Imperial war constructs. The chassis demands vast quantities of high-grade adamantium and reinforced plasteel, each refined under conditions that ensure both durability and structural integrity under extreme stress. These materials are not merely sourced, they are reserved, redirected from other projects, and subjected to priority allocation orders that elevate Imperator construction above conventional military production. Administratum observations note that such redirection can temporarily reduce output in other sectors, indicating that the creation of an Imperator carries opportunity costs that extend beyond its immediate build parameters. Mechanicus records describe the construction process as a layered integration of systems rather than a linear assembly. The skeletal frame is established first, forming the load-bearing structure that will support all subsequent additions. Into this frame are installed the motive fiber bundles, each calibrated to respond to neural command input while maintaining balance across uneven terrain. The central reactor is then integrated, not simply as a power source, but as the core around which all other systems are organized. This reactor must sustain continuous output sufficient to power weapons, shields, locomotion, and internal systems simultaneously, requiring precise calibration and containment. The addition of void shield arrays introduces another level of complexity. These systems must be synchronized with the reactor output while maintaining independent cycling capability to absorb successive impacts. Mechanicus documentation emphasizes that shield alignment is among the most delicate stages of construction. Minor inconsistencies in field projection can lead to uneven distribution of incoming force, reducing overall effectiveness. As a result, this phase often involves extended calibration periods, during which the Titan remains stationary while its defensive systems are tested and refined. The superstructure, often perceived as ornamental, represents a significant portion of the construction effort. Each tower, bastion, and gallery is reinforced to withstand both external attack and the stresses generated by the Titan's own movement. Internally, these spaces are configured to support crew operations, defensive positioning, and command functions. The integration of these elements must account for weight distribution, ensuring that the added mass does not compromise balance or mobility. Mechanicus engineers approach this stage with particular caution, as errors in structural alignment can propagate through the entire system, affecting performance and stability. Administratum cost analysis extends beyond materials and labour to include logistical preparation. The transportation of components, the allocation of Forge World resources, and the coordination of multiple production sites all contribute to the overall expenditure. Records indicate that the construction of an Imperator often requires the temporary reorganization of entire supply networks. This includes the prioritization of transport vessels, the reassignment of labor forces, and the suspension of lower priority projects. The scale of this reorganization underscores the strategic importance assigned to the Titan even before it enters service. Maintenance requirements for the Imperator are equally extensive. Administratum logs categorize maintenance as a continuous process rather than a periodic task. The Titan systems operate under constant strain, necessitating ongoing inspection, calibration, and repair. Engineering crews are permanently assigned to the machine, forming a dedicated maintenance cohort that functions both during and outside of combat operations. Their responsibilities include monitoring reactor output, adjusting power distribution, maintaining cooling systems, and addressing structural wear. Mechanicus documentation provides detailed observations on system degradation. The reactor, while capable of sustained output, generates significant heat that must be managed to prevent internal damage. Cooling systems are therefore critical, requiring regular maintenance to ensure efficiency. Void shield generators also experience wear, particularly after repeated impact cycles. These systems must be recalibrated to maintain optimal performance, with damaged components replaced as necessary. The complexity of these tasks means that maintenance cannot be deferred without risking system failure. Supply considerations extend to both operational and support requirements. The Imperator consumes resources at a rate that necessitates dedicated supply chains. Fuel for the reactor, ammunition for its weapon systems, and replacement parts for ongoing maintenance must all be delivered in sufficient quantities to sustain prolonged deployment. Administratum records note that these supply lines must be secured and maintained under all conditions, as disruption can significantly reduce the Titan's operational effectiveness. This reliance on continuous supply reinforces the need for coordinated support from surrounding forces. Mechanicus observations highlight the importance of ritual in maintenance procedures. Many systems within the Imperator are treated not only as mechanical components, but as sacred constructs requiring specific rites to ensure proper function. These rituals, while not always understood in purely technical terms, are considered essential to maintaining system integrity. The integration of ritual and engineering reflects the broader Mechanicus philosophy, where technical processes are inseparable from doctrinal practice. Strength analysis from both institutions consistently identifies the Imperator's durability as its primary advantage. The combination of layered void shields and reinforced armor allows it to withstand levels of incoming fire that would incapacitate smaller Titans. Its internal compartmentalization further enhances this resilience, preventing localized damage from spreading throughout the machine. Administratum records frequently cite instances where Imperators have continued to operate despite sustaining significant structural damage, maintaining combat effectiveness under conditions that would force withdrawal in other units. Another key strength is its sustained firepower. The Imperator's reactor output enables continuous operation of its weapon systems, allowing it to maintain pressure on enemy forces over extended periods. This capability is particularly valuable in siege scenarios, where persistent bombardment is required to break fortified defences. Mechanicus data supports this, indicating that the Titan's weapon systems are designed for prolonged engagement rather than short bursts of activity. This aligns with its broader role as a force of controlled, sustained destruction. The Imperator's role as a mobile command platform is also identified as a significant strength. Its elevated position and integrated communication systems provide a comprehensive view of the battlefield, enabling effective coordination of Allied forces. This capability enhances overall operational efficiency, reducing response times and improving the accuracy of strategic decisions. Administratum analyses note that campaigns involving Imperators often exhibit higher levels of coordination and reduced instances of command fragmentation. However, both Administratum and Mechanicus records acknowledge inherent weaknesses. The most prominent is the resource burden associated with its construction and operation. The Imperator requires substantial investment in materials, labour and logistics, limiting the number that can be fielded at any given time. This scarcity means that each deployment carries significant strategic weight, as the loss of an Imperator represents not only a tactical setback, but a considerable depletion of Imperial resources. Mobility constraints are another identified limitation. The Titan's size and weight restrict its movement, particularly in environments where terrain stability is uncertain. Administratum records note that improper route selection can lead to delays or even immobilization, reducing the Titan's effectiveness. Mechanicus observations add that while the motive systems are robust, they are not designed for rapid repositioning, reinforcing the need for careful planning and support. The Imperator's reliance on supply chains also presents a vulnerability. Sustained operation depends on continuous delivery of fuel, ammunition, and replacement components. Disruption of these supply lines can degrade performance over time, particularly in prolonged engagements. Administratum analyses emphasize the importance of securing these lines, noting that enemy forces may target them to indirectly weaken the Titan. Another consideration is the concentration of capability within a single asset. While this concentration provides significant advantages, it also creates a focal point for enemy action. Opposing forces may prioritize the destruction of an Imperator, committing disproportionate resources to achieve this objective. Mechanicus records acknowledge that while the Titan's defenses are formidable, no system is impervious. Sustained, coordinated attacks can eventually overcome its protections, particularly if its support network is compromised. In summary, the construction, maintenance, and operational profile of the Imperator Class Titan reflect a balance between extreme capability and significant resource commitment. Administratum and Mechanicus records present a consistent view of the Titan as an asset that delivers exceptional strategic value when properly supported and deployed. Its strengths lie in its durability, sustained firepower, and command capabilities, while its weaknesses are primarily related to resource demands, mobility constraints, and reliance on logistical support. These findings reinforce the broader understanding of the Imperator as a deliberate investment in controlled dominance. It is not designed for efficiency in isolation, but for effectiveness within a structured framework of support and planning. Its construction represents a concentration of imperial industry and doctrine, while its maintenance and supply requirements ensure that it remains integrated within the larger operational system. In this way, the Imperator embodies both the potential and the limitations of large-scale war assets, demonstrating how power must be sustained through continuous investment and coordination. Administratum war records rarely isolate the Imperator Class Titan as a singular narrative element. Instead, it appears as a defining constant within the largest engagements of the Imperium, its presence recorded alongside shifts in territorial control, casualty ratios, and command restructuring. When an Imperator is committed to a theatre, the tone of documentation changes. Engagements are no longer measured solely in unit exchanges or positional gains. They are measured in phases defined by the Titan's arrival, its advance, and the collapse or withdrawal of opposition within its operational radius. One of the most extensively referenced examples remains the deployment of the Imperator pattern Titan, known as Dies Irae, during the Great Crusade, and later the Horus Heresy. Administratum logs describe its early campaigns as demonstrations of overwhelming force applied with sustained precision. Fortified positions that resisted conventional assault were reduced under continuous high-output fire. Enemy Titan formations, when engaged, were either destroyed or forced into retreat under pressure that exceeded their capacity to respond. These records emphasize not isolated victories but patterns. Where the Imperator advanced, resistance diminished in measurable increments until structural collapse occurred across the opposing front. Mechanicus observations of the same campaigns focus on system performance under prolonged engagement. Data indicates that Imperator-class engines maintained operational stability even when subjected to sustained counterfire. Void shield cycling remained consistent, reactor output stable, and weapons discharge maintained within optimal parameters across extended periods. This endurance allowed the Titan to function as a constant source of pressure rather than a temporary surge of force. Mechanicus analysts note that this consistency is a defining characteristic of the class, distinguishing it from assets that rely on short-term bursts of activity. During the later stages of the Horus Heresy, the operational profile of Imperator Titans shifted under conditions of large-scale, high-intensity conflict. Administratum records from the Siege of Terror describe environments where multiple Titan classes operated simultaneously within confined urban zones. In these conditions, the Imperator's size and elevation provided both advantages and constraints. Its weapons could engage targets across dense structural environments, but its movement required careful coordination to avoid obstruction. Despite these challenges, records indicate that Imperator-class Titans continued to exert significant influence over the battlefield, acting as focal points around which engagements were structured. The corruption of Dies Irae during this period introduces an additional dimension to its recorded history. Administratum documentation treats this event as both a tactical and symbolic shift. The presence of an Imperator under hostile control forced Imperial forces to adapt rapidly, reallocating resources and altering engagement strategies to counter a threat that mirrored their own capabilities. Mechanicus records, while more reserved in interpretation, acknowledge that the Titan's performance remained consistent despite its change in allegiance. This reinforces the conclusion that the Imperator's effectiveness is rooted in its design and construction, rather than the specific doctrine of its operators. Beyond these well-documented conflicts, Administratum logs reference numerous campaigns where Imperator-class Titans were deployed in siege and planetary assault roles. These records often lack detailed narrative, focusing instead on outcomes. In these cases, the Titan's presence correlates with accelerated breach of defensive lines, reduced duration of engagements, and increased stability in post-engagement control zones. The pattern is consistent across different theatres, suggesting that the Imperator's impact is not dependent on specific conditions, but is broadly applicable across varied environments. Mechanicus battle records supplement these observations with technical analysis. Data collected from multiple engagements indicates that Imperator Class Titans maintain high levels of system efficiency even under adverse conditions. Reactor performance remains within stable thresholds, shield regeneration cycles continue without significant delay, and weapon systems operate at sustained output levels. Instances of system failure are recorded, but these are typically associated with extreme conditions or cumulative damage rather than inherent design flaws. This reliability contributes directly to the Titan's effectiveness, allowing it to maintain pressure on enemy forces without interruption. Vehicle effectiveness, as defined within administratum frameworks, is measured through a combination of durability, output, and influence on operational outcomes. In all three categories, the Imperator consistently ranks at the highest level. Its durability allows it to absorb and withstand concentrated fire that would neutralize lesser assets. Its output enables it to engage and destroy a wide range of targets, from fortified structures to opposing Titans. Its influence extends beyond direct engagement, shaping the behavior and deployment of both allied and enemy forces. Administratum analyses frequently highlight the Imperator's role in reducing uncertainty within engagements. By providing a stable and dominant presence, the Titan allows commanders to plan operations with greater confidence in their outcomes. This reduction in uncertainty is considered a significant advantage, particularly in large-scale conflicts where variability can lead to cascading failures. The Imperator's presence introduces a degree of predictability, enabling more precise allocation of resources and coordination of forces. Mechanicus evaluations approach effectiveness from a systems perspective. The integration of reactor output, shield systems, and weapons arrays is examined as a unified whole. In this context, the Imperator is viewed as a balanced system, where each component supports the others to maintain overall performance. The reactor provides the energy required for sustained operation, the shields protect the system from external disruption, and the weapons deliver the output necessary to achieve strategic objectives. This balance is critical, as failure in any one component can compromise the entire system. Mechanicus records indicate that the Imperator's design successfully mitigates this risk through redundancy and compartmentalization. However, both Administratum and Mechanicus records acknowledge that effectiveness is contingent on proper deployment and support. Instances where Imperator-class Titans were committed without adequate preparation or coordination show reduced performance and increased vulnerability. Administratum logs cite cases where insufficient reconnaissance or logistical support led to delays in deployment, limiting the Titan's impact. Mechanicus records similarly note that inadequate maintenance or supply can degrade system performance over time, reducing effectiveness in prolonged engagements. The concentration of capability within a single asset also presents strategic considerations. While the Imperator can dominate a battlefield, its loss represents a significant reduction in overall capability. Administratum analyses therefore emphasize the importance of preserving the Titan through coordinated support and risk management. Mechanicus documentation reinforces this by highlighting the complexity of replacing such an asset, noting that reconstruction or replication requires substantial time and resources. Despite these considerations, the overall conclusion drawn from war records and technical analysis remains consistent. The Imperator-class Titan is one of the most effective assets available to the Imperium when employed within its intended operational framework. Its combination of durability, sustained output, and strategic influence allows it to shape the course of engagements in a manner that few other assets can match. From the perspective of the Adeptus Administratum, the Imperator represents a tool for achieving controlled and measurable outcomes in large-scale conflicts. Its presence simplifies the complexity of warfare by introducing a dominant factor that can be accounted for in planning and execution. From the perspective of the Adeptus Mechanicus, it represents the successful integration of advanced systems into a cohesive and reliable platform, capable of maintaining performance under extreme conditions. In conclusion, the war and battle records of the Imperator Class Titan reinforce its role as a cornerstone of Imperial military doctrine at the highest level. It is not merely a participant in conflict, but a defining element that shapes the structure and outcome of engagements. Its effectiveness is derived from both its inherent capabilities and the framework within which it is deployed, demonstrating the importance of integration between asset and strategy. The Imperator does not guarantee victory, but it significantly alters the conditions under which victory is pursued. It imposes a structure on the battlefield that favours sustained, controlled engagement, reducing variability and increasing the likelihood of favourable outcomes. In this way, it fulfills its intended purpose as a strategic instrument of dominance, embodying the principles of endurance, power, and coordinated application that define Imperial warfare at its most advanced level. Inquisition archive entries concerning the Imperator Class Titan begin with a recurring qualification that appears across multiple sealed reports. The machine is classified not only as a strategic asset, but as a convergence point for doctrinal, mechanical, and psychological anomalies. This classification does not imply deviation from Imperial standards in the conventional sense. Rather, it reflects the scale at which those standards are applied and the difficulty of isolating cause and effect within systems of such magnitude. Initial impressions recorded by Ordo analysts frequently describe the Imperator as a structure that resists simple categorization. It is neither solely a weapon nor solely a command platform. It is an environment in motion, and environments introduce variables that cannot always be contained within standard operational frameworks. Observations from Inquisition operatives assigned to monitor Titan legions indicate that prolonged proximity to an Imperator produces measurable changes in behavior among both crew and supporting personnel. These changes are not uniformly negative, nor are they entirely consistent. In some cases, increased discipline and focus are recorded, with crew members demonstrating heightened responsiveness and reduced deviation from assigned tasks. In other cases, reports note the emergence of rigid adherence to ritual beyond prescribed Mechanicus protocols, suggesting a shift from functional procedure to symbolic repetition. It is believed that this divergence may be linked to the scale of the machine itself, where the perception of operating within a structure of immense significance alters the cognitive framework of those inside it. The Inquisition does not treat such observations as incidental. They are catalogued, cross-referenced, and evaluated for patterns that might indicate deeper underlying factors. One recurring theme is the concept of identity diffusion within the command structure. The princeps, integrated directly with the Titan's systems, experiences a level of sensory and operational immersion that exceeds that of any other crew member. Reports suggest that over extended periods, the distinction between operator and machine can become less defined. This does not imply loss of control, but rather a gradual alignment of perception, where the Titan's responses are interpreted as extensions of the princeps' own intent. Some analysts consider this a necessary condition for effective operation. Others view it as a potential point of vulnerability, particularly if external influences were to affect the machine's systems. Mechanicus assurances regarding the sanctity and stability of Titan machine spirits are acknowledged within Inquisition records, but not accepted without scrutiny. Several sealed documents reference instances where Imperator Class Titans exhibited behavioral anomalies that could not be fully explained by mechanical failure or crew error. These anomalies include delayed response to command inputs, irregular power distribution patterns, and momentary deviations in targeting alignment. In most cases, these events are brief and do not result in operational failure. However, their occurrence is sufficient to warrant investigation, particularly given the potential consequences of malfunction at this scale. It is speculated in certain restricted reports that the complexity of the Imperator's systems may create conditions where machine spirit activity becomes less predictable. This remains unconfirmed and no consensus exists within the Inquisition regarding the validity of such claims. Nonetheless, the possibility is considered significant enough to justify continued monitoring. The integration of multiple high-output systems, combined with the neural interface of the princeps, creates an environment where mechanical and cognitive processes intersect in ways that are not fully understood. Further observations focus on the Imperator's interaction with external environments, particularly in regions identified as having anomalous properties. In such cathedral, reports indicate an increased frequency of system irregularities, though these are often attributed to environmental interference rather than internal instability. However, some Inquisition analysts have noted correlations between these Gutnau and the presence of the Titan, suggesting that the machine's scale and energy output may amplify or attract external influences. This theory remains speculative and is not supported by conclusive evidence, but it persists within certain analytical circles due to the consistency of reported Gutnai across multiple engagements. Conspiracy findings within Inquisition archives are approached with caution, as they often originate from incomplete data or indirect observation. One such line of inquiry concerns the potential for Imperator Class Titans to serve as focal points for unauthorized experimentation or doctrinal deviation within Mechanicus ranks. The scale and complexity of these machines provide opportunities for modifications that may not be immediately detectable. While no verified cases of such activity have been confirmed, the possibility is considered plausible enough to warrant periodic inspection and oversight. Another area of concern involves the transmission and interpretation of command signals within the Titan's internal network. The integration of neural and mechanical systems creates a pathway through which information flows continuously between the princeps and the machine. Inquisition analysts have raised questions regarding the potential for external interference with this pathway, particularly in environments where communication systems are already compromised. While safeguards are in place to prevent unauthorized access, the consequences of such interference would be significant, prompting ongoing evaluation of system security. Observations also extend to the psychological impact of the Imperator's presence on surrounding forces. While Administratum records quantified behavioral changes in terms of morale and cohesion, Inquisition reports examine these effects at a deeper level. In some instances, Allied personnel operating in proximity to an Imperator exhibit signs of heightened reverence that exceed standard Imperial doctrine. This reverence can manifest as increased compliance and coordination, but it may also lead to reduced critical judgment, with units deferring excessively to the perceived authority of the Titan. Conversely, enemy forces exposed to the Imperator's presence have been observed to display not only fear but disorientation, suggesting that the machine's impact extends beyond conventional psychological responses. The Inquisition does not attribute these effects solely to visual or tactical factors. It is proposed in certain analyses that the Imperator's scale, combined with its continuous output of energy and sound, creates a sensory environment that influences perception at a fundamental level. This hypothesis remains under investigation, as isolating the specific causes of such tetherat is inherently complex within active Yud conditions. Despite these concerns, the overall assessment of the Imperator within Inquisition archives remains aligned with its established role. It is recognized as a critical asset whose benefits outweigh its potential risks, provided that appropriate oversight is maintained. The presence of anomalies, whether mechanical, cognitive, or environmental, does not diminish its value but necessitates a framework of monitoring and analysis to ensure continued reliability. In conclusion, the Inquisition's perspective on the Imperator Class Titan is defined by cautious acceptance. It acknowledges the machine's unparalleled capability while maintaining awareness of the uncertainties associated with its operation. Impressions and observations highlight the ways in which the Imperator challenges conventional boundaries between machine, operator, and environment. Conspiracy findings, while often speculative, serve to identify areas where further scrutiny is required. The Imperator is not viewed as a deviation from Imperial doctrine, but as an extreme expression of it. Its scale amplifies both its strengths and the complexities inherent in its design. For the Inquisition, this duality necessitates vigilance. The machine must be observed not only for what it achieves, but for how it achieves it, ensuring that its continued use aligns with the principles it was created to uphold. Inquisition, interrogative records concerning the Imperator Class Titan, are compiled under restricted access classifications, often derived from post-engagement debriefings, controlled interviews with surviving crew, and cross-examination of Mechanicus personnel assigned to long-term Titan operations. These findings do not seek to question the Imperator's effectiveness in combat. Instead, they focus on identifying irregularities in behaviour, perception, and system response that may emerge under sustained operational exposure. The objective is not condemnation, but containment of unknown variables. Interrogations of princeps candidates and active operators reveal a consistent pattern of sensory expansion during full neural synchronization. Subjects describe the Titan not as an external structure, but as an extension of spatial awareness. Terrain gradients, atmospheric distortion, and energy fluctuations are perceived as direct sensory inputs rather than abstract data. This integration is necessary for effective control, yet Inquisition analysts have noted that prolonged exposure to this state produces after effects once the connection is severed. Some operators report residual spatial awareness that persists beyond disconnection, while others experience delayed cognitive recalibration, requiring time before returning to baseline perception. These effects are not classified as impairments, but they are monitored as indicators of neural adaptation that may, over extended durations, alter baseline cognition. Moderati and secondary crew members present a different set of interrogative findings. While not directly integrated to the same degree as the princeps, they operate within an environment shaped by the Titan's internal systems and command structure. Reports indicate elevated levels of synchronization among crew during active operations, with communication becoming increasingly efficient and abbreviated without loss of clarity. However, in post-engagement interviews, some personnel exhibit difficulty maintaining this level of coordination outside the Titan, suggesting that the operational environment conditions cognitive behavior in ways that do not fully translate to standard contexts. This phenomenon is categorized as adaptive conditioning, beneficial during combat but requiring monitoring to ensure long-term stability. Anomaly reports compiled by the Inquisition focus on deviations that cannot be fully attributed to mechanical failure or human error. These reports are categorized by frequency, duration, and impact on operational performance. Low-frequency anomalies include minor delays in system response, transient fluctuations in power distribution, and brief inconsistencies in targeting alignment. These events are typically self-correcting and do not result in measurable degradation of combat capability. However, their recurrence across multiple Imperator Class Titans suggests that they are not isolated incidents. More significant anomalies are recorded less frequently, but receive greater scrutiny. These include instances where command inputs are executed with slight variation from intended parameters, or where system feedback does not fully align with external conditions. In one category of reports, it is noted that the Titan's response to environmental stimuli occasionally precedes sensor confirmation, suggesting a form of anticipatory processing within its systems. This observation remains unverified and is treated as speculative, though it has been recorded in multiple independent reports. It is believed by some Inquisition analysts that the complexity of the Imperator's integrated systems may give rise to emergent behaviors that are not explicitly programmed. This hypothesis remains unconfirmed, as the Mechanicus maintains that all machine spirit activity is within expected parameters. Nonetheless, the possibility is considered significant enough to warrant continued observation, particularly in cases where anomalies coincide with high-intensity engagements or exposure to environments with known irregular properties. Interrogative findings also address the interaction between crew and machine under conditions of stress. In high-pressure scenarios, princeps and moderati demonstrate increased reliance on instinctive response rather than procedural input. This shift is generally beneficial, allowing for rapid adaptation to changing conditions. However, it also introduces variability, as instinctive responses may differ between operators. Inquisition records emphasize the importance of training and psychological evaluation to ensure that such variability remains within acceptable limits. Beneficial findings identified within these records reinforce the Imperator's value as a strategic asset. The integration of crew and machine allows for a level of responsiveness and coordination that exceeds conventional command systems. Decision-making processes are accelerated, reducing the delay between observation and action. This capability is particularly effective in complex engagements, where rapid adaptation is required to maintain operational advantage. Additionally, the Titan's internal environment fosters a high degree of discipline and focus, contributing to overall mission success. Another beneficial aspect is the Imperator's capacity to stabilize operational zones. Its presence creates a consistent point of reference for Allied forces, reducing uncertainty and improving coordination. Inquisition analyses note that this effect extends beyond immediate tactical benefits, influencing broader campaign outcomes by establishing a reliable center of control. The Titan's ability to sustain prolonged engagement further enhances this stability, allowing it to maintain pressure on enemy forces while supporting Allied operations. Detrimental findings, while less prominent, are considered critical to ongoing evaluation. One area of concern is the potential for over-reliance on the Imperator within operational planning. In some cases, commanders may structure engagements around the assumption of the Titan's continued presence, reducing flexibility in the event of its withdrawal or loss. This dependency can create vulnerabilities, particularly in dynamic environments where conditions may change rapidly. Another concern involves the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to the Titan's operational environment. While increased discipline and coordination are beneficial during combat, they may lead to reduced adaptability in other contexts. Inquisition records highlight the importance of post-deployment evaluation to ensure that crew members can reintegrate effectively into standard operational frameworks. Failure to address these effects could result in long-term behavioral changes that impact overall performance. Anomaly reports also raise questions regarding the long-term stability of the Titan's integrated systems. While individual deviations are typically minor, their cumulative impact over extended periods is not fully understood. Inquisition analysts recommend continued monitoring and periodic system audits to identify potential trends that may indicate underlying issues. This approach reflects a broader principle within the Inquisition's methodology. Even in the absence of confirmed threats, the potential for deviation must be addressed proactively. In conclusion, the Inquisition's interrogative findings and anomaly reports present a nuanced perspective on the Imperator Class Titan. The machine's capabilities are affirmed, but its complexity introduces variables that require ongoing evaluation. Beneficial findings highlight its effectiveness in enhancing coordination, responsiveness, and strategic stability, while detrimental findings emphasize the importance of maintaining balance and oversight. The Imperator is not viewed as a source of inherent risk, but as a system whose scale amplifies both its strengths and its potential points of deviation. Through continuous interrogation, observation, and analysis, the Inquisition seeks to ensure that these variables remain within controlled parameters. This approach allows the Imperator to fulfill its role as a cornerstone of Imperial warfare while minimizing the uncertainties associated with its operation. Inquisition priority briefs concerning the Imperator Class Titan are issued under conditions where accumulated observations, anomaly patterns, and interrogative findings converge into actionable concern. These briefs do not indicate failure of the platform, they indicate thresholds. When specific variables align, the Imperator transitions from a monitored asset to a system requiring immediate oversight reinforcement. Urgent findings are therefore structured around pattern recognition rather than isolated incidents, with emphasis placed on escalation indicators that may otherwise be dismissed as routine variants. One of the most consistently flagged urgent findings involves cumulative response drift within command execution. This does not present as a single failure point. It emerges gradually across extended operations, where minor deviations in timing, targeting alignment, or movement calibration begin to compound. In early stages, these deviations remain within acceptable tolerance. However, Inquisition records identify cases where continued operation without recalibration leads to measurable divergence between intended and executed actions. The concern is not immediate loss of control, but progressive desynchronization between the princeps and the Titan's internal systems. When detected, protocols mandate temporary operational reduction and full system audit, even under active combat conditions. A second urgent classification relates to shield irregularity under sustained multi-vector assault. Void shields are designed to cycle, absorb, and redistribute incoming force, but Inquisition analysis has identified rare instances where repeated high-frequency impacts create uneven depletion across shield layers. This results in localized vulnerability that is not immediately apparent through standard monitoring. In such scenarios, incoming fire may begin to penetrate at points assumed to be protected. The recommended response, as outlined in sealed directives, is forced redistribution of power to shield arrays and temporary reduction in offensive output to stabilize defensive integrity. Failure to implement this adjustment has, in recorded cases, resulted in rapid escalation from contained damage to structural compromise. Reactor fluctuation is also classified as an urgent condition when it exceeds defined variance thresholds. The Imperator's reactor is designed for sustained high-output operation, but prolonged engagement at peak levels can produce instability if cooling and regulation systems are not maintained within precise limits. Inquisition reports highlight scenarios where minor temperature imbalances, when combined with continuous weapon discharge and shield cycling, lead to cascading strain across internal systems. These events are rare but carry significant risk. Emergency protocols require immediate redistribution of power load and, if necessary, partial system shutdown to prevent escalation. The decision to reduce output is often resisted in active combat, but Inquisition directives emphasize that preservation of the platform takes precedence over short-term engagement advantage. Warning signs extend beyond mechanical systems into crew condition and behavioral indicators. Inquisition monitoring identifies prolonged neural immersion of the princeps as a critical variable. While deep integration enhances responsiveness, extended durations without adequate recovery increase the likelihood of cognitive strain. Early indicators include delayed disengagement from neural interface, residual sensory overlap after disconnection, and reduced differentiation between internal command signals and external input. These signs are not classified as impairment, but as precursors to potential degradation in command clarity. When observed, mandatory rest cycles and neural recalibration are enforced, regardless of operational tempo. Moderati and engineering crews present their own warning patterns. Increased efficiency during combat is expected, but Inquisition records note that excessive synchronization, where communication becomes minimal to the point of assumption-based action, introduces risk. In such conditions, crew members may act on inferred intent rather than confirmed command, reducing redundancy within the command structure. While this can accelerate response time, it also removes safeguards against misinterpretation. Inquisition guidelines therefore recommend periodic communication resets during extended engagements, ensuring that clarity is maintained even under high operational pressure. Internal anomaly escalation is another area of concern. Minor irregularities such as transient power fluctuations or brief targeting inconsistencies are expected within complex systems. However, when these anomalies increase in frequency or begin to correlate across multiple subsystems, they're reclassified as systemic indicators. Inquisition analysis focuses on identifying these correlations, as they may signal underlying instability not immediately visible through isolated metrics. When such patterns are detected, full diagnostic procedures are initiated, often requiring temporary withdrawal from frontline engagement. Environmental interaction remains a variable that cannot be fully controlled. In regions identified as unstable or anomalous, Inquisition reports indicate a higher incidence of system irregularities and crew disorientation. While these effects are often attributed to external interference, their interaction with the Imperator's scale and energy output creates conditions that amplify their impact. Warning protocols in these kshetro emphasize reduced exposure time, increased monitoring frequency, and, where possible, avoidance of prolonged operation within identified zones. These recommendations are not always feasible in active campaigns, but their inclusion in Inquisition directives reflects the recognized risk. A critical warning sign identified across multiple reports is the concentration of operational dependency around the Imperator. Command structures that become overly centralized within the Titan's operational framework risk reduced adaptability. In scenarios where the Imperator is compromised, withdrawn, or destroyed, such dependency can lead to rapid disorganization among supporting forces. Inquisition advisories therefore emphasize distributed command redundancy, ensuring that operational continuity can be maintained independently of the Titan's status. Another urgent concern involves the potential for targeted enemy adaptation. Prolonged exposure to Imperator-class engagement patterns allows opposing forces to study and respond to its operational behavior. Inquisition records document instances where enemy units adjusted their tactics to exploit perceived limitations, including terrain restriction, supply line vulnerability, and shield cycling patterns. While these adaptations do not negate the Titan's advantages, they introduce variables that must be accounted for in strategic planning. Continuous variation in deployment patterns is recommended to mitigate predictability. Despite these warning signs, the Inquisition's conclusion remains consistent with earlier assessments. The Imperator Class Titan is not considered unstable or inherently compromised. It is considered complex at a level where standard assumptions of reliability must be supplemented with active oversight. Its strengths remain dominant, but its scale ensures that any deviation, however minor, carries amplified consequences. The final conclusion presented within Inquisition archives frames the Imperator as a controlled risk of exceptional value. Its deployment is justified by the strategic outcomes it enables, provided that its operation is accompanied by disciplined monitoring and adherence to established protocols. The machine's integration of mechanical, neural, and environmental systems creates a dynamic operational profile that cannot be reduced to static evaluation. It must be observed continuously, with adjustments made in response to emerging conditions. In this context, the Imperator is not simply a culmination of Imperial engineering. It is an ongoing process, requiring constant alignment between machine, crew, and command structure. The Inquisition's role is not to limit its use, but to ensure that its operation remains within parameters that preserve both its effectiveness and its integrity. When these parameters are maintained, the Imperator continues to function as intended, imposing structure, endurance, and overwhelming force upon the battlefield. When they are not, the consequences extend beyond the loss of a single asset. They affect the stability of the entire operational framework built around it. This recognition defines the Inquisition's final stance. The Imperator Class Titan is to be deployed, monitored, and preserved with equal intensity, ensuring that its immense capability remains an asset rather than a liability within the Imperium's broader strategic doctrine.